pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to some more Hot Wheels Hilarity. Well, now I guess is the great time to go on ahead and say that it's my pleasure to bring you my first ever little Hot Wheels inspired beauty pageant. And what we got here are 13 contestants that I got all lined up, mostly suggested by you, so thank you very much. Any one of these 13 models can basically become the most beautiful car that I have in my collection. And one of them will go ahead and receive this little token of honor right here, the gold RD, whom is known as RD06. So of course, let's just see which one of these 13 models is going to win the gold RD. Well, let's find out. First model here is an old classic Ferrari with a nice decorative tornado style decor plastered all over the vehicle. To start off, this one is a nice nifty little classic model that I picked up for cheap on eBay. And eBay of course has been very significant in terms of how big my collection has grown over the years, mostly because of their very cheap prices, nice offers, and usually pretty good opportunities to pick them up in auction. This model in particular was only about 60 cents that I paid, plus a few dollars for shipping. So in total you could say it's about $4.60. For the most part, I picked this guy up on the cheap, but for the way it looks, considering how old it is, this Ferrari in general sure does have a lot to make itself beautiful in its own right. In spite of its age, it sure is quite a model that you can pick up anytime, anywhere on eBay. Next model, Fig Rig. This one is basically just a little reimagining of Solid Muscle, which was of course one of the first models that I picked up that basically revised my collecting skill and how often I was going to be collecting Hot Wheels for this point in time. Fig Rig itself has this nice sort of flame pattern decor on the side, but not necessarily in the typical flame sort of shape. It's in more of a blocky pixel stuff, akin to the kind of graphics that you'd see in things like Minecraft. So that's a pretty good way to honor the game itself by plastering deco on the sides of a Hot Wheels car. But as you notice by these blue pegs right here, which allow for Lego minifigs to stand up onto the car itself, on the hood or on the back of it, it sure does allow for some great stuff to be added here in any way that you like. Third model, Ford Transit Connect. This model is in fact based off of the real-life Ford Transit Connect, except this one is styled to look like a Pizza Express pizza delivery truck. So in a way, it has itself some nice styling cues that are very akin and reminiscent to that of the Pizza Planet delivery truck from the Toy Story franchise, or Pixar in general. But this particular pizza delivery vehicle sure does have some pretty nice, impressive ways of giving you some extreme, elaborate color schemes. The nice yellow, orange, blue, and purple on it, as well as the black on both the wheels and the base itself. They sure do bring a nice, colorful addition to the Hot Wheels lineup as a whole. But this is in fact just one particular color scheme out of dozens that you can find for the Ford Transit Connect to this very day. So that's a lot of styling cues that you can give from one typical vehicle that you can pretty much see anywhere on the roads in real life. Model number 4, 69 Corvette Racer. This model is, again, based off of a real-life model, but this time it is in fact based off of a 1969 racing Corvette, complete with a nice roll cage on the top and a somewhat accurate interior, which is nicely painted in this baby blue sort of color. But aside from the color of the interior and the roll cage add-on, this thing is a pretty good representation of what you can naturally find in most classic style Corvette racers. But unlike the traditional 69 Corvette, this racing version sure does have a nice, accurate representation, even on the base, including this nice sort of spider-like exhaust layout, which extends to the sides. But of course, if you look from the top, you can see that they kind of stick out a little bit. So that does give it a pretty accurate representation of how truly beautiful the real-life Corvette really was back in 1969. And speaking of Corvettes, here comes number 5. The contestant right here is the Corvette C7 Z06. This is in fact one of the latest versions of the Corvette C series models, and just like the other Corvettes, this one sure is quite a beaut in its own regimen. But in terms of accuracy and realism, this thing is chock full on there, with nicely detailed headlamps, a Corvette logo on the hood, and taillights, and another Corvette logo on the back. Very accurately representing the real-life Corvette C7 in any ways possible. It also has the typical sort of rims that you could find on a Corvette when you go out and find it at a dealership, as well as the sort of ground effects that you can see right here on the base. They may affect its performance as a whole, but aside from that, the nicely tinted windows, the black stripe that runs down the hood, and then of course you got some nicely detailed, engraved, and embossed parts right here, including door handles, sills, frames, pillars, and the like, that all add on to this version of the C7's imminent success, both in fashion and in overall design. Next up, we got another oldie right here, but this one is much older than that of this Ferrari. This one in particular is Swoop Coupe. And as I said earlier, it's much older. 40s and 30s sort of old. But no matter the old defining age that truly makes up for this model in particular, Swoop Coupe sure does have some nice quirks in it. It very much is that much of a representation of what cars used to look like during the 1930s as well as the 1940s. And this one does a good job with the nice sort of dual exhaust that sticks out the back, great fins that come out. Then you got yourself a low flow sort of trunk right here and small windows, very accurately highlighting that of the true cars from that time period. Then of course you have yourselves the grille and a hood, which doesn't open up, but of course that doesn't really affect this car as a whole. Then of course you got yourself some detailed door sills, much like the original version of this particular vehicle that you could find way back in the day. And a lot of people have actually done some restoration work on vehicles like those, so that's another key thing to identify when it comes to a vehicle's beauty as a whole. But now let's go on to trucks again. This right here is the 78 Dodge Little Red Express. Pretty rare back in the day, but the Little Red Express sure did try to have a good representation in the Dodge family of pickup trucks. This one in particular sure does do a good job at representing what used to be a little icon throughout the 1970s. The Little Red Express, as you can see here, does have a few sponsors, including Firestone on the side, as well as the Hot Wheels logo near the back end. It has some nicely detailed wheel wells and a bed with lining inside of it, as well as little pieces here that represent the innards of the wheel wells themselves. Not to mention stacks. It's not very common to see a pickup truck out there with stacks that look something like this, but it is still a great detail to find in this particular Little Red Express. But, of course, like I said, this was a very limited thing back in the day. But having my hands on a Little Red Express sure is a pretty nice way to get going. But now, let's go ahead and try something brand new here. Here we have the brand new, well, not so new now, 2020 Koenigsegg Jesko. Straight out of Sweden, this particular model from the Swedish manufacturer Koenigsegg really does look rather impressive. For Mattel to create their own version of the Jesko, I'd say this is spot on if you can really, really look at it. You got everything on here, from the stripes to the windows to the large spoiler on the back that's very akin to a tail on a plane. Then you got yourself the spoiler on the front, the exhaust layout right here on the back, and then of course you have yourselves the highlighted headlamps and vents and the like. Not to mention the large window right here. It's kind of shaped like a boomerang in a way. A boomerang that has been crumpled inwards pretty much. But aside from all that, for a hypercar that comes all the way from Sweden, I'd say that overseas they continue to make great models out there. And Mattel sure does a great job at reviving those very well-known models from the country of Sweden. So, if you've ever heard of Chevrolet, well, aside from Corvettes and Camaros, how about the Volt? This right here is Super Volt, essentially modded version of the Chevy Volt, which of course lasted between 2009 and around a few years back. To this day and age, I have not necessarily heard a lot about what the Chevrolet Volt is going through right now, but in terms of its production, I have not necessarily gotten a lot of pieces together on whether or not they're going to continue production on the Volt or even the Bolt EV, which is another vehicle from Chevrolet. But the Volt itself, for the time period, did do a good job at trying to get together a more green-rich environment, as that's pretty much what we're doing even to this day. We're trying to do the best we can to make the planet Earth a lot more green as a whole. Free of pollution, free of chemicals, free of anything that's harmful to the human body. But unlike the Toyota Prius, which is still around to this day, the Volt did not necessarily do as good. But nevertheless, it continued to stay around even until the near end of the 2010s. But right now is a great time to see if we can actually relive that piece of beauty that lied within the Chevrolet Volt. But now, let's go ahead and get back into trucks with another fantasy model right here, Turbine Time. Unlike the Little Red Express though, Turbine Time, of course, is more reminiscent of your typical semi or big rig. It's fittingly so, because naturally what we got right here is a truck that actually happens to represent a big rig in its own right. But because it's a fantasy model, Mattel does try to do a lot of things that are more customizable to it, including a turbine on the front, which kind of gives it its name, Turbine Time. And then of course you have other pieces back here, including exhaust layout, twin stacks, and a nice sort of layout that's very akin to your typical sort of semi-truck out there. Whether it's a Peterbilt or a Kensworth, it seems that none can compare to the inner beauty and outer excitement that Turbine Time just so happens to offer. But now's the time to go on ahead and get back into the days of old with the '64 Chevrolet Nova wagon, styled like a beach patrol rescue vehicle. And this particular Nova wagon really is that beautiful in itself. To put it bluntly, it's got a nice color scheme. Red, white, black, and blue, along with red stripes on the rims, a silvery base and a white top, and cyan-colored windows for the most part. So of course it already does a good job at trying to look good and all that. Then of course there was actually a gasser version of the '64 Nova wagon, so that pretty much is another thing for you to know. And speaking of old, let's try one more with the '69 Plymouth Barracuda convertible. And this particular Barracuda is wow. Just wow. A yellow windshield, no rooftop with a black interior, a nice sort of gunmetal gray on the outside, feels very smooth to the touch, the way I see it. And then of course you got yellow and black stripes that accent across the sides, and yellow stripes on the wheels. So some models tend to try and be much like some others that I've mentioned here, so let's see if that provides a good enough advantage. For the last model that we got here that was randomly picked out, Here's another fantasy model, Nerve Hammer. This sure is, in fact, quite a hammer, not only on the nerves, literally, but also in the fashion department. It's got itself a nice sort of X-Racers theming to it, with a combination of transparent blue colored plastic, as well as some hot pink, or it's like a dark magenta, yellow striping, and wheels that are also stylized to be X-Racers-esque, with a nice sort of transparent purple on it with yellow rims, in a way. So let's just see how X-Racers actually goes in to help pull this model off. It's already a good enough model out here in terms of its performance and its looks itself, but let's just find out how well it does in this particular competition as a whole. And there you have it. Out of all 13 models right here, only one of them is going to go away with the golden RD. So let's go ahead and see where we can get this to. I've mentioned before that this Ferrari in particular is a bit rare, old, and a nice collector's item, but I wouldn't necessarily go as far to say that it's probably the best in its own right. Fig Rig was another good representation out there in pop culture because of its nice sort of blocky layout in its decoration. In terms of realism, the Ford Transit Connect right here is certainly pretty good in most ways possible. But if you're going to talk about realistic cars out there, then the '69 Corvette Racer sure is quite a nice touch on trying to revive an old classic such as a '69 Corvette. This Corvette C7 Z06 though really does amp up a lot of things here and there. Swoop coupe is a nice oldie, but it is still quite a goodie in most ways, not just in looks and performance, but also this nice color scheme of yellow and green. The Dodge Little Red Express does offer a lot of things out there, as it is yet another older model out there that also happens to be very rare in its own rights. The 2020 Koenigsegg Jesko is quite a good model, quite a great accurate representation in any ways that you can look at it. Enough said. The Super Volt sure is a good representation of what the Chevrolet Volt used to teach us about how to make the world a better place with more environmental advantages. Turbine Time does a lot of things differently in the world of trucks. The '64 Chevrolet Noble wagon does do a lot. In terms of its looks, in terms of its styling, for the '60s, it sure does a good job at it. The '69 Plymouth Barracuda convertible, nicely well done, with the convertible rooftop pretty much not appearing. And finally, we have Nerve Hammer, a model that just so happens to have a nice styling hue because of its X-Racers theme. The combination of colors alone is pretty nicely done. So, let's just see where RD06 is going to be putting at. Out of all 13 models, which one is it going to take? Okay, looks like the 2020 Koenigsegg Jesko has gotten itself the golden RD. So that's a wrap up right here. 12 other models did a pretty good job, but none were quite as good as the Koenigsegg Jesko. A spot-on representation of the real-life model itself sure can go a long way. Though, of course, many of the other realistic models were pretty close. The Corvette C7 Z06 was great in its own right, with having nice details, especially with the headlamps and tail lamps. But it turns out the Koenigsegg Jesko, being a much newer model, obviously meant a lot of things that would have changed, mostly because of production. So the thing is, the Jesko gets a win. And so that pretty much just marks the end of that. So if you want to go ahead and try to find more on my channel, then make sure that you do all that stuff right here. And I will see you guys next time.